All right, thank you, and thanks for the introduction. Yes, so it is WIFA, not Wi-Fi, not WIFIA. We hear all sorts of different ones, but we go by the acronym because it's kind of a long name, Water Infrastructure Finance Authority, but really I think our name kind of says it all. So we are the state agency who is here to help with financing water infrastructure projects that we need throughout the state. I think we had one comment earlier that got to the point of, we know we have to work through the water rights issues and the adjudications, but then we still have this other issue of we don't have enough infrastructure and access to clean, reliable drinking water sources, and we need money to put in those big infrastructure projects. So WIFA has been a state agency for a long time now, about 30 years. With legislation back in 2022, we had the role of WIFA really significantly got expanded, and that was through Senate Bill 1740. And it's been a very exciting time. This last couple of years has been a huge amount of work, but we've been pushing forward. I think it does help to take a step backwards and kind of look at the model of what WIFA was created on to get some historical perspective on what we're doing and why we're doing it. So really at the dawn of the 20th century, we knew that there's a great potential in Arizona to become just a huge powerhouse for the West. But water was always going to be a challenge for us. So starting in the early 1900s, they developed a model where these challenges are going to be addressed by investing public money in the form of low-cost loans to finance big, large-scale infrastructure projects, which are ultimately paid for by the beneficiaries of those projects. So that's the model that produced the Salt River Project. That's the model that produced the Yuma agricultural industry. It also is what produced Hoover Dam, Glen Canyon Dam, and Lake Mead and Lake Powell. So this is a well-proven model that's been working for a long time to have the beneficiaries of the project pay for those projects, but spread that cost out over a long time so that it's affordable for those users. So starting around the 1970s and 80s, we realized, it's not just that we need access to water, we need access to clean water, we need to make sure we're protecting our water resources. That's what came about with the original Clean Water Act and the origins of WIFA, which was the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, which is basically our first funding source that we kind of got started. In the 1980s, 90s, we saw great population booms. We knew that we're going to need more water as we go forward. There's been a lot of state legislation that's been passed over the past several decades that has been pushing to make sure that we are prepared as far as the Arizona communities to address those challenges. So we had first back in 2007, we had the Water Supply Development Fund. I'll touch more on that because we have some exciting developments with that funding opportunity. That created back in 2007 though, and then again, a really big legislation in 2021 was the Drought Mitigation Fund. This felt like a really big deal back when it first passed. But then in 2022, legislators decided that's not big enough. We need to go bigger, and that's what passed. That's what caused passage of the SB 1740. Sometimes we call it the Super WIFA bill because what it did was give WIFA approximately $1 billion, several new funding sources, and the goal to go out, figure out how we can augment our water supplies, how we can conserve our water supplies, and how we can fund these big infrastructure projects. So this is the WIFA team. We are, like I said, a very small state agency. We were originally around 20 people. We've grown to be about 30-person organization, but as far as state agencies, still very small, but we have a big effect and we have a lot of resources to help. So we put on the slide here, we have at top the ADWR and ADEQ. We consider these our sister agencies, but these are the regulators. These are the ones who are telling us how much water we need to grow, how clean that water needs to be. They are regulating those supplies and those keeping our water safe. We are a non-regulatory agency. Really what we have is money. We have resources to help. We have technical assistance, ways to be able to comply with all of the regulations that ADWR and ADEQ are imposing to protect our water resources. So like I said, we have one resource, and that is really money that we can help with. How we help with the money, we have we always say 5 different funds. Technically, we have a few other different grant opportunities as well, but these are the big 5. So the first 2 are the Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Funds. These have really been our bread and butter over the past 30 years. These are the funding opportunities that we know how to do. We've been giving out loans over the past 30 years, over $1 billion throughout all of Arizona. I think it's over $100 million in loan forgiveness that we've given out to help reduce the cost of these projects. And those are administered through funding that we get from the EPA, as well as some local state funding that helps to keep that be a revolving fund. It really was the history of success in these 2 funds that I think led the legislator to decide to give us additional funding and additional authority with the bottom 3 funding opportunities. So I'll touch briefly on each of those. So we have the Water Conservation Grant Fund, which is our newest of funds that we are very excited that has been a lot of progress just in the last couple of months on. As the name implies, it's for water conservation projects. It is purely a grant program. It's available to anyone in Arizona that is a water provider, or it could go to NGOs that are working on environmental issues if they have a public partner. But it is to do grants to conserve water, to use our water more efficiently, to make sure that we're having those short-term goals of using what water we have as efficiently as possible so that we have more time to work on some of the longer-term projects coming through that last funding source there. Before I get to that one, though, I'll touch on the Water Supply Development Revolving Fund. As I mentioned, this one was originally created back in 2007, but it never really had any funding put into it for WIFA to do anything with this fund. Starting back in 2021 and then again in 2022, we actually did have money put into this fund so that we will be able to start giving out loans and grants through that fund. The exciting thing about the Water Supply Development Fund is that it is solely for rural Arizona. How the legislator wrote the bill was that it's basically only going to be eligible for those communities outside of the big active management areas of the Phoenix, Pinal, Pima, AMAs, outside of the CAP service area, basically. So any rural water areas that are in need of water supply, putting in storage tanks and pipelines and things like that, the basic infrastructure to access water will hopefully be able to really benefit from this fund. And we are hoping within the next couple of months, this will be open for people to start applying to. It is still a work in progress on that. And to back up, the Water Conservation Grant Fund is open and accepting applications right now, so definitely an exciting one. So the very last one on the slide here, which might be a little low for some of you in the back, that is the Long-Term Water Augmentation Fund. This is the big, billion-dollar headline-making piece of legislation that WIFA got a lot of attention for because we're looking at now doing some sort of augmentation of our water supplies. So, that's having new water, access to new water. The legislative intent was that 75% of the funds go towards importing water. So it's not just looking at what we have in state, but looking at what we could access from out of state. Like Sarah mentioned, desalination is definitely a possibility, as well as some of those other options. Some of the in-state options that Sarah mentioned, definitely eligible for that other 25% of the funds as well. But a very exciting fund, but like I think it's been mentioned several times, the issue with this funding is that we will be able to produce water from it, but that water is going to be expensive. It's a fact that everyone has come to terms with that if we're looking at doing any sort of big term, desalination or something like that, it's going to be expensive water. Most likely, most of the benefits are going to go to the big municipal areas that have the rate bases that can afford to take on those costs. That's a big reason why the Water Supply Development Fund, I think, got funding in the previous years, because we knew that bottom one is going to be most likely benefiting the bigger municipalities. We want to make sure that benefits are also going to the smaller rural areas. So we have lots of different options and funding sources to make sure we're helping all of Arizona. So here, to back up to the state revolving funds, which, like I said, those are It's a subsidized loan fund that we have in coordination with money we get from the EPA. We can give out low interest subsidized loans, often with some of it being just totally forgiven, so it's not having to be repaid. In some cases, if you have a very small disadvantaged community that has some sort of public health threat, we could pay up to 100% of it as just loan forgiveness, no repayment required, still considered a loan, but is basically a grant at that point. So we've given out actually nearly $3 billion, I think I said $1 billion before, but nearly $3 billion in loans since 1989, all throughout the state, over $100 million in loan forgiveness, and then we've worked with over 200 borrowers just all throughout the different Arizona counties, and have continued to keep these programs going. So very exciting, but you know, working as it has in for the last several years here. So the really, you know, big picture for WIFA is we're looking at the 5-year strategic framework. This has actually just got passed by our board. And to back up WIFA as a state agency, we have lots of committees that we report to, and then a board who ultimately makes decisions on how the funding from those different 5 funds are awarded to the different projects. So we have this strategic framework that our board has approved. And those areas that says TBD, that is not a typo. We are aware that we have some spots to fill in our framework, some questions that we still need to answer. So the very first one, though, is that we need to put money towards augmentation. The TBD is how much water do we actually need? How much water do we need to be importing? That's not a question that we have answers to yet. That's something that we're currently working through as far as doing a needs survey of our communities to ask them, how much water do you want? How much would you be able to pay for it? When do you need it? Those kinds of questions, so we can really come up with a better answer of how much water is WIFA looking to try to bring into the state or to augment. And then for the conservation funds, we have a very aggressive goal of having those grants result in 5 million acre feet of water being conserved. We're hopeful that we'll be able to make that goal. It's an important note that we have in our framework that we're hoping to get $400 million in conservation grants out the door. Currently, we only have $200 million, so this is, again, very aggressive for us, that we are hoping that we're going to get continued funding for this conservation grant so that we can continue to give those grants out for the communities that are wanting to conserve the water. And then the last one is that we are committed to improving the reliability and access for all of our communities, but have identified a specific framework for the 75 additional, what we're calling priority communities that we want to serve within the next 5 years. So really prioritizing those communities that are lower income or that have projects that have really great benefits, really great needs shown. Those are the ones that are going to score high enough in our ranking criteria to be considered a priority community. And it's been the direction from our board that we need to make sure we're going out to those communities and making sure they are able to access our funds, you know, reducing any red tape or administrative burdens in trying to access, you know, loans and grants. So that's been our big goal on that front. And then to back up just a little bit to the water conservation grant again. So as I mentioned, we have currently $200 million. We've been having open grant cycles every month. So every month we open another cycle and then close it. So right now we have received 192 applications for about $230 million. Like I said, we're continuing to ask for people to put in more applications in the hopes that we do get continued funding in this fund. But it's definitely been a huge turnout from Arizona communities. We're super excited to see the numbers that we're seeing, see the interest that we're seeing from the communities, from our water providers who are very much interested in conserving our water, in using water efficiently. And so we have 26 applications that we've approved, awarding just about $40 million and saving potentially 1.2 million acre feet of water. So it's definitely been very exciting. It's been a lot of work for the Water Conservation Grant Fund. but that is a continuing effort for us. And then coming into the end here, so as far as updates, and this is really a big update for the Long-Term Water Augmentation Fund, is that we did get a consultant on board with us, HDR, who is really large firm that is able to help us with some of the next steps that we're wanting to do. So I think I already kind of mentioned the needs assessment that is on the bottom here. We're going out, talking with communities, developing a bottom-up assessment of those water needs. That is ongoing so that we can fill in that TBD on our strategic framework. At the same time, we're also developing a request for information from the potential parties out there that have augmentation ideas. So basically, it's the beginning process before the formal procurement process of where we'll potentially be putting out like a full request for proposals for big augmentation projects. Hopefully within the next couple of months, we'll have the full RFP out and then start collecting proposals for serious long-term water augmentation proposals. So that is the big update there. I think that was the last one. So I'll just close by saying, WIFA it's in a very exciting place. We're in a growing phase right now. We have a lot going on. We know that we're continuing to have to build on what we've done in the past, but continue to progress to make sure that we are providing the resources necessary for Arizona communities to be able to continue growing how they want, have access to the water that they need, and to be able to afford that water that they're accessing. So with that, we'll close. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks so much for coming such a long distance. We're going to hold our Q&A for her because everybody needs to probably use the restroom by now. And you may text your questions to 928-900-3506. Now we're going to have some fun. We're going to have lunch. And we have another sponsor, Old Town Cafe. They've been awesome. And they were here making gourmet lunch for us. Give them a hand.